Welcome to Podcast Done For You, the show where we make it as easy as possible for you to make the right choices to advance your podcasting career. So let's get started on the show. Well, hello everyone and welcome to Podcast Done For You. Now, this is a really interesting episode for those people because it's a bit of a contradiction. On one hand, you're watching this because you're thinking, is a podcast right for you? That's the subject of today. It's one that's been brought to my attention to address on many occasions recently. And I would argue that if you're sitting here watching this or listening to it right now, it actually means that you do need a podcast. Because if half or a part or some small percentage of you is interested in having your own podcast, then it absolutely is the right thing to do. But we're going to go through a whole list of reasons why it's right for you and why it should tick a few boxes along the way, what you want it to do for you. Now, I should say as well from the start that this episode is, of course, made possible by my own program, which is Podcast Done For You, strangely of the same name, where what we do is make a podcast happen for you. You do as much or as little as you like. We do the rest. So there's information in the show notes on how to contact us, but podcastdoneforyou.com.au is where you can get to the page with all of the information. Now, let's get to the real heart of the matter here. Why would you want to have your own podcast? Why would it be the right thing for you? Well, one of the primary reasons why most people start down this journey is underneath everything is this idea of building your credibility. It's the notion that other people are doing it, why shouldn't you? There's a little bit of ego in there, though few people will actually admit to it. I do have to recall that when I did my broadcast journalism degree many years ago, that there was a plaque on the head of the course's desk which said, "My ego is justified," which really does summarize a lot of people in radio, particularly in talkback. And I don't mean that in a harsh way. It just summarizes the way people think. And there's a little bit of that you need to have in wanting to have your own podcast. After all, you're putting yourself out there. But there's always underlying reasons why you would do that and why you're sitting there thinking about it now. The great thing about having your own show is you control the agenda. You control not only what the content is going to be, you control when things are put out and how you utilize that content. We'll come to content a little bit later on, but this whole idea of credibility building is a really important one. At the end of the day, what separates your business from the next is your ability to capitalize on the experiences that you've had. And so credibility is about telling those stories, and it's about sharing your take on the experiences that you've had, things that you've witnessed along the way. So it's a really important thing to understand that you have to pull apart the whole idea of how you've got to where you've got to, and being prepared to utilize those things along the way. Now, I'm not saying you have to go out and tell your story each time. You can only tell that really once, but it's plucking from those experiences. Think of it this way. When you're in conversation with someone, just, at a chance meeting, could be anywhere, you invariably pull out stories that relate to whatever the subject matter is that is happening. Those stories make you memorable. It's the same thing in podcasting. They not only make you memorable, but again, they build your credibility. They tell the audience that you have things that you have experienced that give you a certain amount of knowledge and demonstrate how you responded in that situation. Now, beyond credibility, of course, is the underlying idea of education. Education is a really important thing to consider because, yes, it does underlie the whole idea of credibility and storytelling. But more than that, education is about sharing your knowledge with your audience. So people want to come to you because they're in awe of the knowledge that you bring. They realize that you can do it better than them doing it themselves. So that's a careful distinction. It's a bit like this podcast series. Podcast Done For You is essentially giving you the information and the tools you need to be able to do it yourself. But as I mentioned earlier on, I offer a program where we will do it for you. Now, If you want to go and do it yourself, fantastic. We'd love to hear from you as well. We'd love to show our support for your program. So please send me a link if that's what you've, from watching the programs and you've gone and done it yourself. But the point is, by demonstrating my knowledge here, I want you to come to me. That is why I'm here. And the same thing with any business. By demonstrating your knowledge, you put yourself in a situation where you are educating your audience about the breadth of things that you offer, which is the next part of the education process. Because it's not just about saying, hey, I'm really good at my stuff, but it's about people understanding that you do more than what they may have thought. For example, if you're watching this podcast and this is the first time that you have engaged with me, you will think, okay, I'm all about podcasting. Well, if you go and delve into more of the things that I do, you'll understand that there's more to it than just that. You watch my other program, which is my Biz Bites program, which is all about interviewing some of the business leaders from around the world. And that essentially is also about demonstrating my knowledge as far as marketing is concerned, which is a part of my business as well. So the whole idea of your podcast is to demonstrate not only knowledge, but educate the audience about that fact that you have that knowledge and that ability to deliver different things. If someone hears a story of just about one thing, so for example, you're hearing stories about the fact that I do podcasts for other people, which I do. But I also do things like branding. So if you hear a story about me doing branding, that means that you understand that there's more to the business than just podcasting. Now, it's a really important thing to understand that is important for your business, because if you sit and ponder it, of your existing audience, your existing clients, how many know the full breadth of the offer that you have? How many could possibly benefit from doing more of the services, and they may not even be aware that that's what you do or offer? I'd say that is true nearly of all businesses. So if you think about it, podcasting is a way of educating even your existing audience, because it's an opportunity for people who are already engaged with you to hear more about what you do. Now, the important thing here, and we will dedicate another episode to this in the future, but the important thing to think about here is not just about how many people ultimately will sit and watch or listen to your podcast. Podcasts are about touching base with people in so many different ways. It's allowing you to not only open doors, but to re-educate existing audience. Because that's the thing, that if you have existing client and you send them a message saying, hey, you might want to check out my latest podcast, or you're getting them to subscribe to it, or you're putting it out in a newsletter, an email blast, or on the website, or you're mentioning it in a conversation that you have with them, it gives you an opportunity to educate them further about the value that you bring, to reconsider the engagement that they have with you, to expand it. That is absolutely invaluable for business, because most of business growth comes from existing clients, be it building that base and building those people, or referrals through them. So it's an important aspect of what podcasting is all about. And as I said there, it comes down to producing content as well. It is a really important thing to think about. Many people spend hours and hours a week producing content to go on social media, for example, and in newsletters, on your website, and all of those different areas. Now, producing content is time consuming. The great thing about a podcast is the content is created for you. And once the content is created for you, it's easy, whether it's my team or whether you have team, to be able to pull that apart and repurpose that content in multiple different ways, creating short videos, short audio grabs, graphics, stories, various things articles that you can use from each individual podcast. So what that means is that you're consistently educating your audience across multiple platforms as a result of the podcast. It's not just about you all the time. It's about the insights that you bring and just that notion of reminding people. So what's really important about this idea is that it is not really critical that people listen to every word that you say in every episode of your podcast. In fact, the fact that they simply are aware of it may be enough of a reminder for them to say that there is more value and this guy has or woman has credibility. Now, that is an important aspect to always consider, that it is the reminders that are keeping you top of mind. Podcasting allows you to reach way more people than you would anywhere else. For example, we go all attend networking groups, or most of us do in some way, shape, or form, and you're reliant on X number of people being in the room and remembering who you are and wanting to do business with you later, and you're forcing it on them because they're there to listen, but they may or may not need what you have to offer. The difference with podcasting is that you're reaching out to an audience who has some interest in what you're saying. At the end of the day, that's the reason you're sitting here watching this now, or listening, as the case may be, is because you have some interest in this whole idea of podcasting. So that's a good incentive to enable you to really tune into what people have to offer, and it really is an incentive to listen in to your audience. That's what I'm talking about here. Not my offer, your offer. That what is it that your audience wants? You're enabling yourself to tune into them and educate them, because they are those that are watching and listening are doing so because they're genuinely interested and want you, as opposed to a networking group where it's a bit hit and miss. And again, there's a limited number of people in the room, and it happens once. Most networking groups are not recorded and distributed for people to go and reference at a later time. They're just repeated and repeated and repeated. Whereas the great thing about a podcast is it's out there. You can refer people to it at any time. The episodes stay out there for a long time. They don't always date. It's not always important for them to be consecutive. In fact, most of the podcasts that I do aren't necessarily in an order that matters. You could listen to any one at any time. And that's another important thing, is that you can educate people even before they come and talk to you. And that's something that they can do whether they've done it off their own volition or whether because it is something that you send in advance of a meeting. So people can get a bit further advanced in their understanding of who you are and what you're about by simply tuning in to an episode of your podcast. So that education process is extensive. In fact, one of the reasons why people have a podcast is not the obvious one. It's educating existing staff or new staff. Because here's the thing, that if you're the business leader, if that's your role as either the CEO or the owner, then you've had a series of experiences within the business. Now, your team don't necessarily know all of those experiences, yet they are charged, and particularly when you're talking about sales or account managers, they're charged with engaging with people all the time. And so being able to cross-reference the stories of your business is actually really important. And what happens when you get new team? They have no knowledge of the history really and of all the stories. The podcasts allow you to capture those stories and share them with your audience. So there's another way of educating them. And it can be that it's just using your podcast to bring new people into your system. There is a series of podcasts that I do for clients where it actually isn't made public. It's used simply to educate people along the way as to what might happen if they engage with this particular company. We do a series of interviews in that particular case. So there are lots of different formats as well for your podcast, and that's something to consider. A lot of people immediately assume that a podcast has to have a guest. Now, here's one of the things to be aware of. Doing this, like I'm doing right now, and talking to you on my own and keeping you engaged is actually not that easy. Now, I'm hoping I'm making it look easy, and I'm hoping that you are being engaged along the way. If you're still at this point, then shoot me a comment, and so I know that you've made it to what point, hopefully to the very end. But the important thing to remember is that this part is not that easy to pull off on your own. So people immediately go to the idea that they should be in an interview situation. Now, I'm not saying don't have guests on your podcast. I have a podcast with guests on it. But the art of interviewing people is actually a difficult art form within itself and may not be something that is in your wheelhouse. Now, again, we'll come to the fact that doesn't stop you from having guests. I'll talk about a way to do that in a moment. But I think what you need to consider is why you do a podcast is to build your credibility. So it's important that you are positioned as the authority. So whether that is in a situation where you're being interviewed, which is why I anchor a lot of programs for people as part of Podcasts Done For You to make that easier. So people just show up, they are the experts. I'm getting them into a conversation rather than an interview in order to be able to make sure that they maximize their opportunity to tell the stories. And it's much easier to do it when you've got another person that you're sharing it with rather than simply just talking to camera as I am doing now. So that's an important opportunity to remember. Now, that also means that if I'm anchoring a program, I can also assist if it's interviewing or bringing in a guest into the conversation as well. Again, if you have the skills to be able to do that, fantastic. And we have recorded a special podcast to help you with tips on interviewing other people. So check that out if you need some assistance with that. So these are some of the things to consider about why you should have your own podcast. Now, there are other things to consider as well. Podcasts ultimately help you kick in some doors or at least knock on them. Now, think about a number of people that you would like to have some kind of engagement with, that you'd love to have a meeting with them, but you know that actually having that meeting is difficult. Well, if you send them a podcast link, that may get your foot in the door because you get to share something with them that they can listen to in their own time rather than being forced into a meeting. And they get to hear your insights and the opportunities that you might bring to add value to them without necessarily being specific because it's out there for the general public. So they know that you're not just selling to them. So it's a really important idea that you can bring to people. Again, talking about doors that you want to knock on, it might be media. One of the great things about having a podcast is that it opens those doors as well because the media love people that they know can talk, can deliver some insights. So that may be something to consider as well, depending on the area that you're in, whether there's a call for that or not. And it may well just be industry media. It doesn't have to be mainstream media. But again, you've created that opportunity. You also create more opportunities to appear on other people's podcasts because podcasters love to talk to other podcasters because it's about sharing mutual audiences. So that's another thing to consider, that it really grows your audience base massively as a result of that. It's also a fact that if you want to become a speaker, a podcast is a great platform for you to demonstrate that you can speak, that you can deliver on different subjects that are all encapsulated into episodes at whatever length you decide them to be. Again, that's a strategy we can work on, and we can talk about that another time in another episode of Podcasts Done For You. So we've got a lot of reasons here why you should have a podcast. And just that simple idea of educating expands into creating new opportunities for speaking gigs. But it also creates huge amounts of content, as we mentioned, which in turn, you take all of those things together, can create courses for you, can create new opportunities for you to deliver additional services in your business utilizing what you've now created. So it creates an opportunity for an ecosystem to develop as well, all out of just being able to be interviewed by someone like myself, or if you can deliver it yourself on your own, great, you can do that as well. So these are some of the things to think about. Now, again, it's all a matter of deciding, is it right for you? Well, if that hasn't answered it with all of those ideas, let me give you some numbers as well, because some of you like some numbers, right? And I've mentioned these before, but I want to mention it again. The reality is there are very few active business podcasts in the world. The best estimate that we can get is about 225,000 active business podcasts. Now, That's not very many when you consider that there are more than 500 million people listening to podcasts of this nature every single month. And they listen to multiple episodes as well. So that means that it's not just a case of dividing 500 million by 225,000 to get what your audience will be. It, of course, it can be all of those people, although it's hardly likely that you'll get 500 million listeners, but great if you do. But certainly there's an opportunity there, and it's growing all the time. Podcasts are becoming increasingly popular, again, particularly in this AI-dominated world where there is no disputing that a podcast is authentic compared to content that is created by AI that, can be written at any point by someone that you have no idea whether it's the actual person writing it or not. So, is a podcast right for you? Well, I would argue that you've got this far. It 100% is right for you. Podcasts help you stand out, and ultimately, they give you a credibility that used to be only singled out for books, for authors. That old idea of a thud factor, where if you had a book that you'd written and you thud it down on someone's desk, it would give you that a bit of credibility and that informativeness to be able to say to people, hey, you should buy from me because I've written a book. If you've got a podcast, it does just the same job, if not even more so these days. And in fact, if you are an author, you should definitely have a podcast because it helps complement the book. Again, we'll save that going into detail about that for another episode. So lots of reasons here why a podcast is right for you. And as I said, you don't have to be overwhelmed by the idea that it is difficult to do. Yes, you can follow a bunch of my videos and you will be able to work out how to do it yourself, but also we'll make it easy for you. As I like to say, that if you think that there you go. That's showing that it's live, isn't it? That even mistakes happen with the best of us. What I was going to try and say there was, because you have a camera that's incredibly powerful in your pocket on your phone does not make you a photographer. And just because you can follow all of the instructions to do a podcast doesn't make you a great podcaster. My role in Podcast Done For You is to shine a brilliance onto what you do. And we will make your podcast brilliant because that's what our purpose is. That's what we do. That's what we know best. So if you would like to have a podcast, we'd love to hear from you at Podcast Done For You. Again, details in the show notes about how to reach out to us. If you have any questions about podcasts that you'd like me to answer, please drop me a line, put a note in the comments. We'd love to have some further feedback, as we have done today in answering that question, should I have a podcast? Well, the answer is 100% yes. As I've said before, we look forward to your company and having you on another episode of the Podcast Done For You show.